Similar to the hysteria that was brewed up around Y2K at the beginning of this century by people who didn't understand computers, in 2012 there was an attempt at creating similar panic around what was purported to be the end of the ancient Mayan calendar, and people who didn't understand Mesoamerican history thought that was something to be afraid of. There was a lot of speculation that on December 21st, 2012, the world would end because the ancient Mayans had ended their calendar on exactly that date. I have no idea why anyone thought that an ancient culture's calendar should project time into infinity, or why the Mayans might be able to predict the end of the world when they didn't appear to be able to predict the collapse of their civilization. But for reasons that don't make any logical sense, people tend to think that ancient wisdom is somehow superior to modern wisdom. I suspect that most of you were brought up to believe this unquestioningly. Whether your family was Christian or Jewish or Muslim, you grew up being taught to assume that the wisdom in your ancient holy book was superior to absolutely everything else, whether we're talking about a history book or a physics book. Your holy book equated to truth. This is maybe a little less so for Buddhists and Hindus, who are typically more focused on practices than they are holy writ, but still, in all of our cultures, we tend to award ancient insight with some special magical knowledge. And when the facts collide with Scripture, conservatives will oftentimes always defer to Scripture, whereas we progressives are sent into intellectual gymnastics as we try to explain what this term actually meant in ancient Hebrew or New Testament Koine Greek. We labored over Paul's references to homosexuality, insisting that he didn't really mean what he apparently actually said. When what should be obvious to all of us is that these ancients, while often producing wonderful poetry and narratives, also had a very unsophisticated knowledge of science or psychology. And as Bill Maher so plainly puts it, no author of any part of these scriptures actually knew where the sun goes at night. Qualitatively, if you lay the writings of Plato and Aristotle beside the content of the Bible and the Quran, and Plato and Aristotle written 800 years before the Quran and 400 years before the New Testament at least, it is evident that ancient Greek philosophy is a whole lot more insightful, better written, and more intelligent than anything in any of our holy books. But we still don't turn to Plato or Aristotle for answers to complex modern problems. I'm grateful to have spent time studying the scriptures as an account of the beliefs of our ancestors, and studying history can be informative about interpreting the present, but turning to Scripture as a source of moral authority in the 21st century is every bit as dumb as trying to use first century dental practices to teach our current generation of dentists. This devotion to ancient texts is a lot of what has made modern religion so irrelevant to the current generation. We are living in a time of fairly rapid decline in participation in organized religion. And I don't want to get all bogged down in graphs and statistics, but let me just describe the speed of the trend. We entered this century 22 years ago with about 70% of Americans at least claiming membership in some religious community. And after just 2 decades, that number is now less than 50%. I've not found reliable numbers more specifically looking at the effects of the pandemic, but I know that the past 2.5 years have been devastating to our Springfield congregation, and I suspect it's had a huge impact in most churches. The denomination into which I was born boasted about 2 million members when I was a child. By the time I graduated from seminary, it was down to about 1 million. In the past few years, their active numbers have actually dropped to about 200,000, and I think they might be fudging a big part of that. They are 1/10 of what they were when I was a kid. The much more conservative churches, like Churches of Christ, have experienced similar decline. Even Catholic church attendance has dropped by 20% in this century. That's been especially devastating to monastic communities, many of which are simply watching themselves decline into extinction. The decline rate has not been as great among authoritarian churches like the Catholics and the Mormons, and in part because strict loyalty to the teachings of the church is demanded of them from an early age. Most kids can safely switch from, say, a Methodist church to a Presbyterian church without being taken out of their parents' will, but to leave the Mormon church or to leave the Catholic church is typically a rather more dramatic departure. Catholics even have a term of disdain for free-thinking members of their church. They call them cafeteria Catholics. That is, they might like the Catholic identity. They might be Irish or they might be Italian, and so they are Catholic even if they're atheist. Or they might like Catholic liturgy, but they don't agree with teachings about birth control or abortion. In fact, statistically, there's no difference between Catholics and non-Catholics in the percentage of women who use birth control. You can find broad condemnation for cafeteria Catholics all over the Catholic world. Look up any diocese newspaper and look up cafeteria Catholics, and you'll find some layman just really wading into them saying, if you are Catholic, you must swallow the whole enchilada. I'm surprised that anyone still accepts that kind of mental imprisonment, but it does still happen. The decline in church attendance has actually been pretty well mirrored by my own decline in respect for organized religion. My former denomination, a communion that I loved and was proud to be a part of, over the decades became a greater and greater embarrassment, with one scandal after another, making the institution's hypocrisy impossible to tolerate. During all of these years of numerical decline, the phrase that has come up increasingly among the unchurched is the favorite disclaimer, "I'm spiritual, but I'm not religious." And like a lot of popular sayings, that can mean something quite profound, or it can be a very shallow statement that is drenched in so much narcissism that it basically equates to saying, I quit going to church and started worshiping myself. To be fair, there are good things and bad things about being religious, and there are some very good things about being more of a solo act in your spirituality. But there are real vulnerabilities there as well. An old friend of mine recently reminded me of something he heard me say in a sermon more than 15 years ago. It seems a little humorous to me now, but he claims that I said, being spiritual and not religious is all well and good, except for the fact that people who are spiritual and not religious never get anything done. Which goes to the organized part of organized religion, doesn't it? When I was a denominational pastor, we built a Habitat house every year. We fielded large relief teams that we sent to both poor nations and poor neighborhoods, and to hurricane and tornado devastated communities. If there's anything I really miss from my former life as a denominational pastor, it's that, joining in with a team to help a homeless family build their own house, or cutting bamboo and mixing mortar with a shovel in a depression on the ground in Nicaragua to build a feeding center for one of our elementary schools. It takes money, and it takes younger and stronger volunteers to go and do things like that. Now, we've got about 15,000 viewers and listeners around the globe, but I can't call together 25 of them to go jump in a bus with me and drive to Appalachia to assist poor farmers in the eastern Kentucky mountains. People who rant and rave about how much they hate organized religion will still take their kid to St. Jude's Hospital when they have cancer. And they never complain about the fact that they don't have to pay for the miracles that they receive there. I despise the opulence and the wasted money of megachurches in our area. But like most of you, when I'm traveling through Europe, I never fail to go marvel at the cathedrals in those historical cities. And honestly, guys, what is a cathedral but a 500-year-old megachurch? Religious art, music, and architecture have enriched our culture and fed our souls for centuries. Sure, it came with homophobia and misogyny and pedophilia and patriarchy, but is anyone here really sorry that they're rebuilding Notre Dame after the 2019 fire? For centuries, statesmen and philosophers have been predicting the death of organized religion. They do that with good reason because of the moral and intellectual weakness of it and the growing irrelevance of it to modern society. 250 years ago, Thomas Jefferson predicted that every man in the United States would be a Unitarian before they died. However, you only have to listen to the campaign ads of many of our current candidates for governor and U.S. senators around the country to realize that a huge portion of our society is still, even in this modern era, entirely prepared to wholeheartedly believe some of the dumbest stuff imaginable. So I'm afraid that organized religion, while in decline, is likely to be around for many more decades, if not centuries, increasingly marginalized and losing social influence, but stubbornly refusing to die and to give up their preference for ancient wisdom over modern insight. The Jewish Dutch philosopher of the 17th century said of this combination of ancient religion and current law, I'm talking about Baruch Spinoza, of course, that laws which prescribe what everyone else must believe and forbid people to say or write anything against this or that opinion are often passed to gratify, or rather to appease, the anger of those who cannot abide independent minds. As often as I quote Voltaire in my sermons, you have to be aware that it was illegal to own a copy of one of his books when he was alive and living in France. We, collectively, fought for marriage equality for decades against a mindless devotion among conservatives to ancient religious prejudices, but once equality was won, people said almost nothing about it. People quietly accepted it because there was no noticeable difference in their straight relationships or in society or business. It was almost like getting the Supreme Court to come out with a decision that said that the sky is blue and grass is green. Ancient religion was just wrong, and modern medicine, psychology, and ethics were right. But again, with a conservative majority in the Supreme Court, there are whispers of trying to turn back the clock and take away even the rights of gay people to marry one another, just as they have taken away the rights of a woman to manage her own reproductive life. So ancient superstitions and the values that are shaped by those, informed only by myths, have not died away. The fight for reason continues. If I've not already made it clear, please allow me to sum up by reiterating my basic complaint about what it has meant to be religious. When you try to take the wonder, the awe, the existential experience of the I and the thou out of our awareness that we live in a holy and amazing universe and put it down into a book, a creed, a set of doctrines, dogmatic beliefs, you are killing everything that is wonderful about having faith. You turn from a living faith to a dead religion. One of my theology professors at Vanderbilt called this trying to F the ineffable. We become aware that there's an ineffable aspect of the grand mystery of the universe. It's like love in the sense that you can write a love poem, but if you try to write a love prescription, you will fail. Or as some more witty preacher put it once, focusing on religion over spirituality is often like going to a restaurant and eating the menu. I could go on all day about what is wrong with organized religion, but I must also add the warning that independent thinking without any accountability to a community of faith often leads to equally superstitious thought that is different from credo religion only in that it's even more silly and more narcissistic. Spiritual people can and should question everything. They can be free to consider absolutely anything in their search for truth. But still, like our use of peer review among academics, I'm just suggesting that in our freedom, that we not lose sight of the value of critical thinking, of discernment, and the insights of scholarship. It's okay for me to disagree with everything that my professors at Vanderbilt and Harvard ever said to me, but I should have a reason to disagree with them beyond my personal preference. And I should be able to put my thoughts up to a spiritual community that can help me to assess whether I'm just satisfying my own ego or if I'm actually making progress. If we can approach our spiritual lives in an honest search for an informed worldview, maybe then we can preserve the community that we enjoyed in our more traditional church life. I'm not knocking the good things that we do as individuals, but really an individual cannot build a Habitat house or start a St. Jude's hospital. And while we can, as individuals, demonstrate against regressive government decisions on our own, it sure does have a lot more impact if a few hundred of similarly inspired peers show up to carry signs with us. There are things that we can do together that we simply cannot do alone. So please, though I appreciate every one of our global listeners and viewers, as well as our local supporters, please don't let the content we provide to become a substitute for you being in a community. I encourage everyone to continue to look for your tribe. Be connected to others who are inevitably not just like you, people that don't always agree on everything with you, but with whom you share a sincere search for what is true, what is good, and what honors that grand mystery of our existence.
Thank you for watching our videos. We are entirely dependent on the donations of our listeners and members. We hope that you find this content to be important enough to help us to keep offering these videos to the public at no charge by becoming a regular contributor. Please click on the donate button on our website at www.spfccc.org. Thank you for your support of progressive religious programming.